Council. We have the full council here. Our first item is an update on open space prioritization project, and I will go ahead and do that update. I'm going to pass around for council. You know, you had your the information that you got in your packet. If there's any questions about any of that, I'm happy to answer. I think most of it should be self-explanatory. Okay. And what I just passed out is something we discussed at our meeting. We had a meeting yesterday, and I'll kind of go over that in a second. But just to kind of get us in the right place, council approved forming this task force that would look at prioritization and generalizing for our open space, our trails, and our parks in the community, in terms of how, you know, in order for us to make budgetary decisions, primarily out of the open space fund, which is, while it is a fund that gets replenished annually, it is also a finite fund. So it's not endless. And the asks on that fund are high. So what we have done is kind of created this group. We're keeping the group small with the intent that this is something that we want to get back to council quickly. February is our goal, because we do need to make some commitments, I think, in the near future about some spending out of the fund in order to get some projects started, because they do take a while. So myself, as council appointed or approved, and then Keith Reister is representing the city. We originally, I think, had Randy in there, but Keith works more closely with the South Suburban and the efforts that we do with the open space and stuff like that. So he's on the committee. Mike Broughton, he was representing South Suburban, which actually works really nicely because he had obviously been at the city, and he worked with us when we were doing a lot of these projects, so he's got insight knowledge on that. Hillary Merritt is with Trust for Public Land. She sat on our original board, or original task force for Open Space Task Force, which we did in, I think it was 2013. And that task force actually put together kind of the guiding document that initiated a substantial amount of land purchases, open space purchases, and it actually, in review of it, it's still very pertinent even today. So she brings that knowledge. And then Bill Nagel, as a business owner and a trail user, and you all know Bill from Petal. And then Josh Tennyson, and he's with Arapahoe County Open Space. So he's very well versed in everything we've got going on. The other great thing about this is that we've got entities here that have worked on master plans and including trails and parks and those types of things. And so Arapahoe County has a couple, and South Suburban has at least one. We've got a couple. And so one of the things that we talked about is kind of what is it that we're going to get back to council. And so the synopsis is not so much to give council a list of recommendations as to what to do, but more a document that says, here is some recommended criteria in order to analyze these things, and analyze them based on different types of risks, different types of needs, different types of partnership money that can come into it. And so when you're looking at certain expenditures, there may be no partnership money, and so that would be delineated out in the report. And others, there may be upwards of 5 or 6 funding partners, and so those types of things. Also recommendations on even putting, kind of holding some reserve for some acquisitions. We're also looking at, in this, we're going to take all the different reports. I think there's 5 or 6. We've got the SHRAD from the South Platte Working Group. We've got our own trails and bike plan and a number of them. And we've reviewed all of those, and we've kind of pulled down what are the commonalities in terms of priorities that those have extracted. What's interesting about all of those is that how much we've accomplished through many of those. So it's like, okay, well, we've done that. So that proves that they're valuable reports. And so even though they're not really dated past maybe 4 years, they're still real pertinent to what we're doing. So we'll be using those to help provide kind of the basis for the project lists. Additional projects, we're not seeking out anything other than what we've got documented in these reports. So when it comes back to council, if council has additional projects or things that they want to put in there, then we can add those to that and then fit them in based on the kind of the criteria designed in terms of prioritization. And prioritization isn't really intended to be whether we do it or not, but more a matter of when do we do it. Because understanding that there's different influencers throughout the year that will, and throughout the time span of even a 10-year time span. We want to work this into a 5-year plan, budgetary plan, and so council will be doing that. That will be part of the job of the force, but task force, but the information will be able to help guide council into making that decision. So, questions, Becky?
Yeah, so I'm assuming if we wanted this much money for a given project, but we had this much coming in and it would pay for something lower, we might go ahead and use that, right? Because we don't want to just have money accumulate and not make good use of it.
Yeah, I think
balance that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we struggled with and kind of vet out more on the task force and bring to council is in terms of acquisitions in particular. Acquisitions can get in the millions, obviously, but acquisitions also can come with a lot of partnerships. But when an acquisition pops up, it may pop up on Monday, and we need to make a decision by the next Monday. I mean, it may be some of this stuff becomes that volatile. So in those instances, the task force is saying, perhaps we should have a reserve where there should be, instead of, because right now, when you look at the 5-year plan that we saw at the budget period, 5-year plan was spent down to under $500,000. If we do that, and that's including all the money that would be coming in over those 5 years, if we do that and an opportunity arises anywhere during that time, if we committed that money, we would not have an opportunity to make that acquisition. And some of these acquisitions can be very, very important to the protection of our trail system and our connectivity and our open space. So that's going to be part of the conversation. There's less and less of that because we did a lot of that along the river, and there's less and less that you buy in the community too. So, but we know that there are a couple things out there right now that we're keep our eye on and we need to be very diligent about. So, and the other thing is that we are looking also at community input because we recognize that these plans that we're kind of combining in here did include some community input. We also have community input that we've gathered through East-West Trails connectivity study that we are in probably the last third of with the South Platte Working Group. There's great information there on citizen input, and there's also great information in our citizen input from our citizen surveys and stuff. So we're going to combine that. One of the things that has shown up, we found the consistency is that when asked, it is always head and shoulders above all else that acquisition is their number one when it comes to open space acquisition. So we're going to take that into consideration when sharing what we believe should be criteria and priorities. I think you guys will find the report really helpful. We'll update you again on December 6th. We're having another meeting between now and then. And the group we met for 2 hours, and it was solid 2 hours of really, really, really powerful work. So we are plowing through it. And on December 6th, Will be here, and so we'll have even more to share at that time. So we just want to update you as we go along, make sure that if there's any questions or concerns along the way, if you feel like, oh, you guys are going a little, get back over here, so that then at the end, when we give you what we're bringing you, it'll be what we need. Karina?
I really like that the scope encompasses parks, trails, and open space. So bigger than the original maybe scope or intent of the previous study, because that's a lot of what we're talking about when we're talking about our outdoor spaces. It's not just about the open spaces. It's very important that we have that, but it's also the connectivity across our city, et cetera. So I like that scope increased. I'd like to get an understanding, and maybe this is what's going to happen December 6th, is this criteria, how that will develop, and at what point council will be able to weigh in or discuss some of that criteria. When do you see that happening?
Well, we're kind of pushing through some of that now, and I think December 6th you'll probably get kind of a foggy view of it. One of the things we looked at was that criteria for open space purchase would be very different than the criteria for a playground rehab. So we kind of need to break them into areas of project. And so when an open space opportunity would come up, then we would have some criteria to review that through, and onward. And then kind of the overarching is the way that the master plans have prioritized each of the project categories, and then the way the citizens have prioritized those two. Then that will kind of put them in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 order, and within that prioritize down.
So the criteria within each of kind of open space, trails, et cetera, and then criteria of deciding, do we do 5 parks or do we do 1 open space acquisition? Will that also be considered?
Probably won't go to that level. It would be more, that would kind of be council's decision based on looking at it and saying, okay, we've got a 40-year-old park here that is going to cost $500,000, and we have 2 leveraging partners, so that takes it down to this. We have X amount of money. We've got an open space acquisition, and so it's looking at those facts and then saying, okay, where's our balance? Because you guys, will be making those purchase decisions or those policy budget decisions, but without having the lay of the land, we're kind of shooting in the dark right now. And this kind of creates that map.
And what's the best way to feed information to the task force if there's a particular property or area of interest, not knowing whether it may already be in some of these plans or not? What's the best way to funnel that to the task force for consideration?
I would just say tell me, because as the liaison, then I would take it back. If it's not in any of the reports that we're working on, we will not put it in the report because we have not had any analysis of it. So we want to make sure that if it at the end you'll see here a list of projects that flow from the studies, and explanation of relevance is what you'll be presented. So without being able to, that would not be something that would have flowed.
You'll keep that as a parking lot, and we can.
Yeah, and then that would be something council, when you see kind of how, you agree to the kind of the criteria, the prioritizations, and then bring a project in. There's probably a couple or 3, I know you have one, and then weigh those in, and then council can put them into the grid. All good?
Yep. One question, December 6th and Thursday, what?
Oh, then it's the 4th. No, at the 11th. We're meeting, the task force is.
That's what I
meeting
thought
on
it was,
the
I just want to confirm, like,
I'm sorry,
I'm not
so-
seeing it on my calendar, I just
Yeah.
want to confirm that. Okay.
So, yeah, the task force is meeting on the 6th, so it would be that study session.
All right, I have one more. On the document that we have on our study session, it says that it would be ready for council at the end of January. Any chance this is something we can bring to our retreat and work through at our retreat? Just because it is so substantial, that might be a good forum to work through this.
If we have it done. Yep, I think so. Yeah, we do have another, Will actually indicated that we might be looking at February, just because we had a couple bumps with a couple meetings in there. But if we can, I think that's a good idea. We'll add that to our considerations of the calendar.
Thank you.
You bet. Anything else, guys? Okay. So So next topic. Oh boy.
Good evening.
Ernie.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Council. I'm Steve Kemp, and with me is Joscelyn Mills, our Community Development Director. And we're here to talk about gun ranges and recreational definitions in the zoning code. And what we are asking for the council to provide is direction on location issues for future gun ranges. Now, obviously, a gun range that's currently in existence isn't going to be addressed by this. But the underlying problem that we have in our code is we have a general definition called recreational uses. And we have only a few sub-definitions, none of which address gun ranges at all. In fact, the gun range right now falls under, an indoor gun range falls under a definition called indoor amusements, which includes a whole variety of other things. One of the things, as the council will recall, a few years ago, Clarion Associates did a study of our zoning code, and one of the most important points they mentioned was they said, city, you need to have, whatever you have as definitions, identify them as uses in your use chart, and if you have uses in your use chart, have definitions in your definitions. We are doing that as we're bringing to you amendments. You saw the same, recently you saw the same thing in short-term rentals. That was part of that Clarion recommendation, and tonight we have another piece of that where we're doing the same thing. And so the background here is, right now, this is a principal permitted use in B2 and B3 zones. It's also a principal permitted use in many of our planned development zones because what they did on their list of allowable uses is they said any recreational use as permitted under the City of Littleton Code, which I'm not 100% sure some of those folks necessarily considered how that chart works, because they essentially opened the door to a whole series of recreational uses as principal permitted uses that they may not have intended. And so it's important to consider in this city. And we have a huge number of planned developments. About half the city is planned developments. It's not straight zoning. And these planned developments mix commercial, industrial, and residential uses together. And so principal permitted uses, if you have them in a planned development, they are going to go immediately either to site plan approval if there's exterior improvements or building permit approval. And recently we saw an example of that. And so that's the background that brings us here to you tonight. Now, some potential approaches, one is to update the definitions on recreational use in the zoning code, and specifically define gun ranges as a use. Right now, an indoor gun range is an indoor amusement. It's located in the same things as, such as a gaming establishment, like a Round One, and a gun range are the same things. An outdoor gun range is an outdoor amusement with no buffering and no restrictions.
And just to add to that, I would add one thing, I think it's all under the definition of recreation. So
And it falls under the definition of recreation. So one of the potential approaches would be to make gun ranges a conditional use in those districts where they may be located. And one of the things that could be done here would be to apply that to existing PDs, planned development. So even if a planned development says recreational uses are permitted, the code would say that may be true. However, if it's a gun range, you're going to have a conditional use. And what this does, this now will invoke a public hearing process, and this will provide a framework to address gun ranges in the future. And so the staff recommendations here would be, first, we need to modify the definitions in the zoning code to define gun ranges. Because right now, treating a gun range and a gaming establishment the same doesn't work. Secondly, we need to modify other definitions to ensure that gun ranges are included. Our definitions right now, because they don't match our use chart, and our use chart doesn't match our definitions, a good example is, You could take an establishment, we have adult uses. We only specify a few of the adult uses in our use chart, even though we specify them as definitions. So you could have an adult use such as an adult sex club, argue that they are actually an indoor amusement and should be able to be in zones that we would never want them in. And so we need to deal with our other definitions. Just dealing with those two definitions, the concern I would have as your city attorney is that we are leaving things wide open in the recreational use area for a whole variety of things. While cleaning up gun ranges is important, we recommend that. We recommend also taking care of the other definitions in the recreational use area at the same time. And we would require that in all zones, including existing planned developments. Indoor gun ranges and outdoor gun ranges. Indoor gun ranges would have to have a conditional use permit. Outdoor gun ranges would have a number of conditional use restrictions where literally, and these are very typical in most other front range cities, you would not likely be able to locate an outdoor gun range in the city. And why? Because usually there is a mile buffer from an outdoor gun range to a residential neighborhood. And that is just simply because an outdoor gun range, you have a whole series of different issues than you do from an indoor gun range. But it's certainly not an outdoor amusement the same as a racquetball court.
Would it be easier just to not allow outdoor gun ranges within the city?
I don't recommend that because then you raise this issue of cases that have come up under the Second Amendment saying you're flatly not allowing to exercise that right. What the courts have said is, and a good example is Chicago had some regulations, and the Seventh Circuit said the fact that you couldn't locate it because of the regulations, that is not an impact on the Second Amendment. If Chicago had simply said, you shall not have it, we would look at that as a Second Amendment impact. But here, we're not saying if you could find a spot in Middleton that met all the conditional use criteria, yes, you could locate it. The reality of it is, if you go on an outdoor gun range, the reason that they do that buffering around residences is you have a whole different context of noise. You also have a whole different context of normally you want to require things such as maybe a landscaping or a hill or whatever for the rounds to be shot into so that you have a control on how far the rounds go. There's a whole series of issues, and if you can find a parcel, so be it. But the reality of it is outdoor gun ranges pose a series of different issues in an indoor range, but we recommend conditional uses for both. Because this way, this gives us that ability when a range project comes in, like an indoor range, and let's just use a recent project. It would come in, there would be a police department review from a security standpoint. We would look at it from all of the federal air quality, lead mitigation, lead emission standpoints. We would also look at it in terms of, as a conditional use, parking and how parking fits. We would also look at its compatibility on adjacent uses. And all of these factors would be considered as part of a staff recommendation to the Planning Commission on that conditional use. And there would be a public process. And right now, and we recommend this for the existing PDs as well, because we have so many PDs, if you left the PDs out of it, you could well find a situation with a PD where this very act would be repeated. I mean, I recently looked at a PD application and working with planning, we saw the initial list of allowable uses, and Jocelyn and I both said, wait a second, you must have copied this from another PD because this does not work. And they had as one of their allowable uses, all recreational uses as permitted under the City of Middleton zoning code. And obviously, the staff, we've said, no, that's not going to do. But we believe that it's in the city's best interest to incorporate this within PDs. And that would be the staff recommendations. And so if council were to concur, we would be bringing a draft ordinance to the Planning Commission for its study session, a hearing, and coming back to you in February for first and second reading. And there's been some question about, well, what about other types of gun-related issues? We looked at other things. If you look at in this state, there's no city, not a single city of the 271, that addresses regulating operations of gun stores. The closest thing is Boulder regulates the sales of some weapons, but no city does that. If council were to say, we'd like you to look at that, we would recommend that that be done in the future, as the city manager can discuss in terms of looking at staff resources. That would be a future project. I would tell you that I think this piece is critical. This piece should be the first priority. Anything else that council wants to look at, we as your staff will of course do all the work in that, but my recommendation to you as the city's lawyer is this is number one. We need to deal with this problem, and then however council wants to direct on the others, we can certainly respond to that.
Questions, Jerry?
Sure, a couple short questions, short answers, I hope. On page 5, and this is part of what was already in existence. When you go down to, I guess, F4 and also G4, where it says protect from any negative impact. Is that really the right words we want to say in there? I mean, who's the judge of what is negative and not? That was just a thought. That was just a thought on that. On something else I had though, when it gets to location, when we get to, I think it was page 7.
Mayor Pro Tem, members of the council, I see that what we did is when we went through the conditional use code, we didn't amend any of the provisions like on commercial outdoor uses and commercial teen clubs. We just tried to carry that over. I would tell you, we have a later project that will come to you down the road where we're going to bring to you a rewrite of the administrative section of the code. This will be part of it, and we're going to rewrite this comprehensively. But right now you have other projects which you've indicated ahead of this, but we have not forgotten about the administrative sections. We're acutely aware that needs to be worked on.
And it seemed like as far as location goes, and it addresses that a little bit on page 7, gray area, J2, but also it addresses locations in several different areas. But at no time do I see it, does it really address school locations or school zones or? Wouldn't it be best, I think you're trying to make it more simple, wouldn't it be best to have anything addressing location together?
We didn't create a buffering. You could certainly do that. One of the reasons we didn't is, quite honestly, between the district schools, charter schools, private schools, I'm not even 100% sure. We would have to first develop a map of all these types of protected uses, both schools, and then most likely you might add churches, you then might add daycares, and right now we don't really have that as a resource that we can use. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't, again, look at that in the future, but what we wanted to do was bring something right now that gave us tools to address this problem where we don't have any. And certainly if council wants us to address buffering in terms of protected uses, Jocelyn and I are happy to study protected uses and come up with a plan for how that could be done.
And then on also page 9, I guess it would be, sexually oriented businesses caught my attention. So a while back, the city of Littleton had a case it went all the way to the Supreme Court. Have you had a chance to take a look at that at all and how that might relate to this?
I have not, but this is an area that I have to say I've been extremely familiar with because I've had my own experiences in the federal court system with this. What we did was I did look at a number of Supreme Court cases, and one of the concerns I have with our current code is, which we have as conditional uses, is we don't really do a good job of defining all of the things that would be sexually oriented businesses subject to a conditional use. And And this was really an attempt to bring those all in, because I think the real intent here should be, we treat all sexually oriented businesses as a conditional use and treat them the same. We don't really say, well, an adult cabaret or an adult movie theater, we're going to treat as a conditional use, but an adult modeling studio isn't. I would tell you to me, you're getting a whole series of First Amendment issues, and my advice is on adult uses, the whole gamut we treat exactly the same.
On page 10, number 4, it doesn't include daycare. Should it include daycare?
Page 10, what?
Page 10, number 4 at the top. Is school defined?
In home or?
I don't know.
You know,
It's not
Mayor
in the
Pro
web.
Tem, let me take a look at that. I'll take a look at that, and we'll deal with that before we come to the commission. But we will look at the issue of including daycare. And again, one of the things I think we'll want to, Jocelyn and I will want to talk about is how we deal with all these protected uses, identifying them, and then making sure that we don't issue permits when you're within the distance of that protected use.
And last but not least, then on page 15C, word bottom, it says incurred by the county. Is that, should that be incurred by the city?
Yes, we will change that.
That's it. Anything else, I'll just email you.
Just a quick follow-up to what Jerry was saying. On page 6, in reference to correctional facilities, there's the distance away from schools right there. So I would support having pretty much that language.
Daycare's in there.
Put it in there for firing gun ranges, indoor and outdoor. That just says no property containing gun range shall be located within 500 feet.
Yeah, that's one of the ones, I think it should be together, same type of definition.
Yes,
We
I
can
support
certainly
that.
do that, and we'll, Jocelyn and I we can do that, and we can also then look at how we're going to actually track this. One of the biggest concerns I have is on this type of thing, making sure we have a good way of catching all the public, the charter, the private, the daycare, because what you don't want to do is permit something and then you discover, we've given it a permit and it's inside the distance criteria. So we can there are ways to deal with that. I've been involved in that before.
I mean, and one thing this one has here is also playgrounds and parks. I think, that's,
Yep.
you're gonna have lots of kids there too, so I think that's.
And Steve, you had indicated that shall not, on the shooting range, shall not be located on any lot adjacent to residential zoning. And kind of wanted to stop there. When we did medical marijuana, we went fairly deep into the schools, the parks, the playgrounds, the trails. I think we even maybe had retirement homes, I don't know. But when we did that, we were also able to produce a map. We called it the paint gun map, where there were blobs of color that said, this is where it's not permitted. Here's your school, here's your 500 or 1,000 feet of school, and then you go a little tighter in, and here's a church here. And so when you look at that, whatever was blank was where something could go. And there was, for all intents and purposes, I think there was one space, and somebody found it, and they built one. But why can't we do that with this?
I think we can do that, Mayor, Council. We can do that. Based on what you've said, we can do that. I've been involved with other cities where we had locational restrictions. What we'll do as a staff, we will basically go through the city, we'll identify all the protected uses, define them in the code, and then what we'll do is we'll create a map with a buffer around every one of those protected uses, and we can do that. It's a doable thing. What I wanted to try to convey was, it's just a piece of work that we would do. We've heard loud and clear, you want it done, we'll get it done.
Yeah, it's just an ongoing, static, live conversation. That's all
Yes.
about how we continue to monitor when those uses and where they come in. That's the only piece, but we can actually with GIS, certainly we can.
Takes a few clicks of a button and you can get it done.
Yeah, Eric actually, I think, did the paintball medical marijuana one. Yeah.
We've heard that's what the council wants. We'll incorporate that into the conditional use, and we will figure out how to implement that and get it done in a way that works.
Thank you. Karina?
I just want to be very clear of what this is. So the one item that you will be doing is updating all the definitions, providing
the
definitions
recreational area.
where they're not there. You're also going to be providing security guidelines. They're not security standards, but security guidelines as it relates specifically to gun stores and gun ranges. Is that correct?
Well, we'll be doing, I'll have the city manager, I think he wants to.
Yeah, I think the approach is that in the conditional use permit process, the staff would be involved, police department specifically would be looking at application by application and making recommendations relative to security and safety. So it's not necessarily a set of guidelines that we generate, but the staff would be looking at it very specifically with those purposes in mind.
But then as we're going through the conditional use process and a public process, if all the recommendations are not taken into account, can it really be a basis for our decision?
And council member, the answer is going to be yes. What staff's going to do is, when we do an analysis of a conditional use permit, we're going to have various departments, whether it be fire, police, analyze that request. If an applicant refuses to comply with the recommendations of a department, what your staff is going to do now, I would tell you, I've had departments in my experience that have made recommendations that were not really supportable. But generally, if we have a department that makes a supportable recommendation, permit applicant at their risk is going to may well find themselves with a negative staff recommendation to the planning commission on their application. And then the planning commission, I am certain, will consider that staff recommendation and how they approach that permit. So the answer is, if you refuse the police department's recommendation, does it mean that you're not going to get your permit? No. Does it mean that you may get a negative staff recommendation? Yes, you may get a negative staff recommendation.
If I may, let me add a little more to this because it's kind of relevant to the next topic, vacation rentals, and it has to do with kind of administrative regulations that we as staff would write in execution of any kind of a code change. So in the case of the police department, when they're making a review for security and safety, this would be one of those areas where, we would be recommending that the police department actually put together some kind of guidelines of what they would use internally in trying to evaluate these things. Other cities I've been in, there's a name for this. I think it's context-sensitive design, where police departments very specifically have a set of criteria they use to evaluate certain projects. So this would be a case of administrative regulation that we'd be looking at, so that we would put that in place so that it is public. You can see how the department would be evaluating that, and then that would be feeding into the rest of the process. That's what I would suggest we do.
Having been on the planning commission, I don't recall, a staff recommendation that was negative based on an element that was just a recommendation. The only time I would have seen a negative recommendation if a requirement was not met. So this is why I'm asking this question. We've talked about this even in the downtown design guidelines versus standards, so it just doesn't feel like it's enforceable.
I was just going to offer relative to conditional use, remember in that code, there are certain criteria that need to be met relative to planning commission and their role of making a determination. So what we're saying is that if staff feels that based on recommendations from the police that we're not going to be able to find those criteria being met, then we would be able to bring forward a recommendation of staff saying that we're not finding that it's met.
That's why I called it a guideline or for you to have a criteria to be met, that means it's documented. Semantics on the words, but I just want to be clear of how this can be used and whether or not it truly is enforceable.
But I think
in
that's
the decision-making process.
Yep. Point taken, but really it's using the concept of conditional use, and that is about the application in and of itself and evaluating it based on that criteria about health, safety, welfare. Does it fit within that neighborhood and within that ability? So it's not, is it meeting a setback or anything like that? It's really more on the whole application, which can include recommendations from our police department and other pieces that fit. Does it meet that criteria?
We're here to set policy or to enable policy to be made. On that level, what else do we need to talk about as a council right now in order for you to move ahead?
Council members of the council, I think we have your direction, which is that you want us to incorporate what we call protected uses. We identify a series of protected uses and spacing requirements. We would do that in the draft before it goes to the planning commission, and unless there's a different consensus given to the mayor, we are planning on proceeding then to the planning commission study session.
Okay, Kyle had a question.
Just had a question of, it's kind of, we'll preface it with, do we know what we don't know? Is there something that we're not contemplating here? I have something in mind with an indoor recreation use that is kind of come up is axe throwing. How would that be? No joke,
I understand.
throwing axes.
I heard about it.
Did it last week.
Yeah, how would that be contemplated in here? Would that be under archery? Would that be, I mean, and oftentimes these are also at bars, so you have alcohol and axes being thrown. So this is,
That would require, that would be a question of liquor code. But right now, that would be, if you look at it, we have indoor recreational uses that are not included in our list of recreational uses, and they would be a conditional use in the B2, B3, and CA zones. The only zones that they would be a principal use would be in the 2 industrial zones. So that actually...
Yes, but appreciate the point, and we'll definitely look at that. We are not leaving any unintended,
The other,
at least to the best of our ability.
yeah, I know. I just,
and you might want to consider just in definitions paintball. I didn't see it in there unless I missed it.
I mean,
We
things.
can certainly do that.
Or perhaps in definition of any activity that can endanger people, rather than trying to hit all the specifics. Yeah.
We will look at the definitions, Mayor. If there's consensus, we...
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think the big issue was that, if something's not explicitly stated here, how do we find that,
City manager?
I just wanted to comment here. The staff communication talks about another issue kind of related to guns, gun ranges specifically. And that has to do with our noise ordinance. And I know that's been an issue here with a recent project. So the staff communication talks here, it's a much more complicated issue. The staff has kind of recognized this was an issue here about a year ago when we were looking at this ordinance relative to outdoor concert events. And so now we recognize we've got some work to do on that front. Now combined with another use like gun ranges, this is going to be a much more complicated project to kind of evaluate. And we're suggesting that maybe at your retreat here in January, kind of look at all the code issues that we've got coming up here for the next year. Talk a little bit specifically about the noise ordinance and see what your preference is about where it fits. Currently we had it at a lower tier, but you may want to reconsider that here once we get back into your priorities.
Noise ordinances are...
Let's throw signs in there while we're at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And lighting.
Signs and noise.
It reminds me of the sign
Lighting
code.
ordinances. There you go.
Karina?
That is, so some of the things that we're kind of, this is done, tabled, it's fine. I'm coming back to your comment about our council retreat. For those that have been here a few years back, there was the study that even Steve, or the work that Steve mentioned from Clarion, which was the land use table. A lot of the things that we're addressing now are those things that were identified back then. And I feel like we are reacting to a lot of these things happening to us when we've actually identified that there were gaps 3 years ago that needed to be addressed. So, something for us to consider and for staff to consider is, do we go back and take a look at that project? How do we bring that to fruition so we look at things more holistically as opposed to reacting to situations that are coming up? Otherwise, I feel like we will continuously be chasing this. And I'd like us to get in front of it so we can make decisions in a more objective manner. So that's what, I would like us to discuss at the council retreat, that we really look at it more holistically of getting a complete land use table that is accurate and not, filled with gaps and definitions, et cetera, so that at least when, we don't pick and choose, we think this one is important, but maybe something else becomes important 2 months down the road because it flares up.
And I would agree that the retreat's probably the best opportunity for us to really talk about that. There's, obviously we only have capacity to do only so much, and so it's trying to figure out what's the best path to take as we complete the comp plan. That's obviously our main goal here.
Well, and I think that's the other thing to keep in mind is that we have taken off a huge amount of work to do. That's with the comp plan. And so when you look at, and all things that we're talking about, it all needs to be done. The zoning, the land use code, all of it needs to be done. And I think the best thing we can do with our time at the retreat is to talk about how we prioritize those over time. As much as it'd be great to get them all done and boom, bless it, it's just going to take longer than that. We are going into our 6th month of work on a project that was supposed to take 2 meetings. So this is what happens. It gets turned and churned and churned. And so I think that would be, that's definitely, we've got that on the schedule to talk about what are the pieces that we need to move forward with and the level of importance. And there will be things that pop up and we will just have to deal with them. But I think having a plan, and then that also helps staff be prepared. So in terms of just the comp plan, and now all of a sudden, the transportation master plan has popped up in there, which is great. And then those things will flow into each other. So we have a full retreat. It's going to be a good retreat.
What is the date? When I look at the calendar, I don't see on the date.
January 25th, I want to say.
25th and
Is that a
26th.
Thursday, right? No, wait, I'm sorry.
25th, 26th.
25th and 26th, Friday and Saturday.
And,
Update my calendar.
Is that going to be added to this calendar?
well, it better be.
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
it should
you
be
don't
on
see
there.
it. Apologize.
Okay, so we're good on that?
We're gonna have that.
All right, next is, goody.
No one is happier than I to be back here.
Short-term rentals. At least.
This is going to, why we're coming back to you on short-term rentals is, at the last council study session, we covered a number of issues, and almost all of them, the council provided consensus and direction, but there were a couple that we didn't have consensus and direction, and we need to come back to you, and just on those issues, get your consensus and direction. What the game plan, assuming council does that, will be that we will be coming to you on December 4th with a request that you introduce the ordinance, schedule it for publication and first reading. Now, assuming council does that, if council members have amendments, what I would ask is, because quite candidly, on the 4th and the 18th, you have massive agendas, and they are all involving fire, which involves me to a great deal because there's several hundred pages of documents that are involved. And I'd ask that you come in and see me and we'll do written amendments. If council member, I understand you may come up on the 18th with an amendment that you want to do, that's certainly your right, but to the extent you can come in, myself, Jocelyn, and myself, Sama, we will all work with you on Jocelyn, on written amendments. And I would ask if you could do that, just because the sheer amount of the fire stuff is such that that's overwhelming in itself. Now, moving on to short-term rentals. We have why we're here tonight is we have some unresolved issues that we just want to make sure we have your guidance and we're implementing your direction for the draft ordinance. And the first one is occupancy limits. There wasn't a clear consensus. Right now, the International Building Code that we have in Littleton requires 150 square feet per person. There is the model of Lakewood, which says that you have to have a minimum number of square feet per unrelated, not family members, just unrelated people in the house, and no more than 5 unrelated people in the house, which is a difference in the building code. And in the prior study session, there was a discussion of 2 people per sleeping area, which would be basically 2 people per bedroom. So what we're asking tonight is for the council to simply provide us direction on how you want us to determine occupancy.
Is there a way that all 3 of those come together into one?
I wish there was.
They seem like 3 different measurements.
They are very different measurements.
It seems like there might be a way that they all come together.
If you do 2 people per sleeping area, obviously if a house has 5 bedrooms, you could have 10 people. If a house has 3 bedrooms, you would be limited to 6 people.
Well, a sleeping area, I think is vague. I don't know that always delineates a bedroom. If you have a den with a rollout.
Have a floor, that's a sleeping area to me.
Yeah.
We would define that to import the definition. Basically, in the building code, a sleeping area is an area that is designated as either a bedroom having access to a bathroom or having access to another room.
A kitchen
Closet.
has
A bedroom
access.
has to have a closet.
But a kitchen has access to a
And that's
bathroom.
separate, but the sleeping area requirement, we can define that in the code if that's the way council wants to go.
What do you recommend?
My recommendation would be from a standpoint of just making this easy in terms of, what I don't want is situations where staff has a difficulty, a code officer. I'd really recommend the Lakewood approach or the building code approach. The building code approach is straightforward. We simply look at square feet, divided by 150, that tells us the maximum. The Lakewood approach, we simply say, okay, there's the minimum number of square feet. Lakewood uses 400, for example. We say, okay, 2,000 square foot house, you may have 5 unrelated people, and that's it.
What does unrelated have to do with their people?
I want to get away from
The
that.
reason that unrelated is used is really that comes out of the federal Fair Housing Act, where you simply just say, okay, there's a certain number of unrelated people you have, and everybody gets treated the same way. But you could just do building
But
codes.
Steve, this is where we got twisted up before. It's
I
unrelated,
know.
and you've got family, and so if the family is out of town and they're renting it out to another family, nothing's unrelated at that point. I don't get what
It's just
unrelated.
people.
Yeah, I think the
They're just
building code
people.
is
Yeah.
I recommend switching the building code to 200 square feet, because at 200, now we're at a 2,000 square foot home, you're talking 10 people, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's a lot. So at 150 square feet, you're talking whatever that number comes out to.
Oh, do we want to do
12,
a maximum?
13.
We could cap it at a max. 7 people, max.
I think Carol's
This
point,
thing is you get a family of 10 people.
so Carol's point is a good one, where she's essentially saying, to just go, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but how I understand that is, so the size of the house matters, the number of bedrooms matter, and the maximum amount matters. So it's not like one does not fulfill that. When you think about when you are even using this, you're looking at, you may not be traveling with family, so you're traveling with unrelated people. You may have 2 families and the kids are sharing a room and there are 2 bunk beds in a room. So I do think that while I understand you want to try to make it as simple as possible from a code enforcement perspective, we have to look at this as how it is being used, and as long as it's being used responsibly, I think it really is the point of, it's a little bit of all of those that we have to bring into this conversation.
So I think the the square foot per person is the most important thing, because, a larger house can accommodate more people. The familial relations, you could have, if we don't have a cap and you're saying only, maximum of 5 unrelated people, you have a family of 14 and not, so there's loopholes there. So if you just say, 200 square foot per person, that's what you get. And then you have a max. If you get a...
Well, Lakewood sort of did that.
Lakewood did that, but they tied it to unrelated people. If you want, my suggestion would be, again, this is something I expect we will come back to you, like every other city, and what my recommendation would be, based on this discussion, that we take the 200 square foot per person and say that the maximum number of resident individuals will be 200 square foot per person. You have a 2,000 square foot house, you can have 10 people. If you have a 1,500 square foot house, we would say, okay, it's 200 square foot. If you're 1,500 and less, you're at 7. If you're 1,501 to 1,600, you're at 8. And we would just, and we would handle it in that fashion.
I think that's great. And I think, the amount of times it's going to hit that is pretty rare.
And in a year, I've asked council that we come back to you in a year after you adopt this, and I expect we will have experience then, and we will have some recommendations on things that we need to do differently, just like Denver did, just like Golden did. I expect we will be doing the same thing.
I'm not looking to do what Denver does every time.
I support what you just said.
I'm still not understanding, if you've got a bedroom, most people, unless you've got 4 kids and double bunk beds and whatever, you got usually a max of 2 people per bedroom. So if we associate it with bedrooms and a limit of 2 people per bedroom, is there something wrong with that?
There's nothing.
For housing.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that, just from a standpoint of trying to enforce that becomes a much more invasive thing, because we have to look at the bedrooms and then say, okay, if we say 2 people per sleeping area, and some houses may have larger bedrooms or smaller bedrooms, I think from an occupancy standpoint, it really works better if we just set a maximum limit.
Carol?
Could you say succinctly what it is you believe we have agreed to? Just so we know.
We haven't.
I don't hear.
No, Steve's recommending that we do building code limit 200 square feet per person. Peggy, where are you on that?
Maximum.
No?
What?
Pat?
Yep.
Yep.
Kyle? 200 square feet per person.
But no maximum?
No maximum.
Maximum the size of the house.
Be based on
I'll go there. I'll go there.
You're there.
I would
Carol?
like to clarify living space versus, unless the code already does this, because you could count the basement, you could count the garage, you could count.
Those are not living spaces, so we would go to the building code and use.
Okay, so it's clarified by the
Yes.
building code. Are we doing something still with related and unrelated, or didn't?
I don't think you have to deal with that then.
Right, no. It would just be 200 square foot per person, building code qualified living space.
Yes.
Sounds good.
Carol, are you okay? Karina? Okay, we're good.
Okay.
The manager does a chair dance.
The next issue is contact information for neighbors. Some places, do we require that phone number of a local contact be provided to neighbors? Or do we just simply say, if you have an issue, you contact the city and...
Kyle and then Carol.
I'm fine with providing to the neighbors, but I remember you said there was, some privacy issues with that last time. What about, if a neighbor has an issue, there is a listing on Airbnb, VRBO, all these places that have, say, do you have a problem? Call this, and the actual company that hosts that rental can take care of it. And can we require a contact number listed there? There is a contact on that.
I think that we could actually do that, where we could just create on our website we would just simply have a list of Airbnbs, and there'd be an Airbnb address, contact number.
Okay.
And you could just access the website if you had an issue, and certainly my argument would be that while we don't want neighbors to wage vendettas against each other, my response is this is public record, and if you came in, we'd provide it to you. So the only difference is we're making it just easier to get the public record.
And so there's two opportunities for a person to contact. There would be the city's website with all of the Airbnb, the licensing information, and the Airbnb website that has that information.
Carol and Karina.
I really don't want to have to go through the non-emergency police number, because that it depends so much on what else is going on. I do very much like the idea of the person running the establishment to make contact with their neighbors and let them know what's going on. I think that could be a very useful way to minimize difficulties.
Karina.
I agree with Carol on that. What we're hearing from these people that do have some of these Airbnbs, they're actually doing this anyway. It's good for them, it protects them, their property, and it creates good stewardship in their community. And I also don't necessarily want us, the city, to get into the business of maintaining that list and updating that list. I mean, and as a neighbor, I wouldn't necessarily, it wouldn't be intuitive for me to go to the City of Littleton website to know who to contact. So I don't think we as a city should do that. And I think this is goodwill, and I think it's standard practice as well.
I actually have spoke to a friend who has an Airbnb in a different state, and they actually require that any neighbor that abuts the house has all the information and is notified when when it's being rented out. So, and it isn't about the person who owns the Airbnb having to be responsible to their neighbors. It's about the neighborhood appreciating that there's a shift in a home and everybody's got their eye out. So I think having something included that there be that sort of requirement would be appropriate.
I think we could easily do that, Mayor, and just simply require that the licensee must notify all the neighbors adjacent to the property of their contact information and their local contact information. And that would be very easy to do.
Well, the people that then are renting should also know that.
Yes.
So that their behavior changes because they've got 16 sets of eyes on them.
And that's part of the information that we will require as part of the licensee's application, that they have to put all of what we call the relevant information, everything from contacts to when trash is picked up and those kinds of things. That has to be made available to the renter, but we can easily include this if that's the council consensus.
Well, I'd like clarification on what adjacent is.
Adjacent.
If somebody's on a corner, then you could have quite a few people. So are we talking?
If you're adjacent, then what that means is if that neighbor's property touches yours, you're adjacent. So if you live on a corner, conceivably, you could have a corner lot. I'm going to just pardon my diaphragm, but
The attorney's gonna draw.
the attorney's going to draw. That's really a bad thing. Because
Minor in art.
So if you have a corner lot like this, and this is the street.
Steve, are you
You
using
have
a
a lot
Sharpie?
right here. Conceivably, you could have one house here that would be adjacent, one house here that would be adjacent, and you could have a third house here. So you could have 3 houses conceivably adjacent. And all 3 would have to be notified.
But not the
Think it was
ones
about-
Across the
facing,
street would not?
and the ones across the street?
Now, that would be the question is, do you want to require the ones down here to be notified across the street and say they're adjacent and we're not going to count the public right of way?
The ones across the street may have a lot more visibility of the property.
I wouldn't count the public right
Than
away.
somebody else.
Then we can easily address that.
Yeah, and I'd offer we do that with other areas of our code, and we could use the same adjacency, which does include across the street. So we can just use
That's what
that
our
same
code
thing.
does
We do
right now.
for HPB, all those applications require that notification, so we can use that same.
We can easily do that. And if
Because
there's
it is
council,
360.
is this council consensus on that?
Yes.
Then, moving on,
No, well, one last one then about the local contact.
the local contact.
Remember, there's a distance requirement discussion, and where did we land on
I
that?
think my notes indicate you landed at 10, the local contact had to be within 10 miles of the
That's what I remember.
property.
That's what it
So
says.
we have that, and so I think we've resolved the issues. We'll be coming to you, as I mentioned, first read December 4th, and second read on December 18th.
Carol?
What about parking?
Parking, right now, the last resolution, this was not the last study session, but the one before that, council indicated that you would have to meet the parking code and you could not pave over any of the front yard to create additional spaces. You would have to have adequate off-street parking based on your existing parking, or you'd have to park on the street, but there would be no paving over the front yard. Now, if council wants to go further with that, we certainly can.
But there'll be no parking on the front yard, even if it's not paved.
Yes, I mean, you couldn't park where there's paved. Now, if we,
Sometimes people have parties.
Yes.
And the whole front yard and the side yard and everything else gets parked.
and that's a violation of our code.
Right.
And we would treat that as a violation of our code. Now, sometimes people want to increase the size of their parking, and they want to pave over parts of their front yard for parking. I certainly would recommend against that. I think that really detracts from the character of the neighborhood to allow for additional parking to be paved. And so we would limit the parking to what you can park in your driveway. Any additional parking is going to have to be on the street.
I actually have a concern about that, because I think that's actually one of the neighbors' concerns, is that that they fill up the street. And so if one of the neighbors is having some people over, and maybe it's a cul-de-sac, there's 1,000 scenarios. The one that I stayed at in San Antonio, you had to park off-street. So she had a 2-car garage, so there was place for 2 cars. That also helps limit the number of people that can be there. So maybe it's all parking must be off-street, except for maybe 1 car can be on-street. In the event that they don't have a driveway, or they have I don't know, I don't want to start splicing and dicing this thing too thin, but I think part of the problem is having them occupy all the street parking. And some of these streets, like Peggy Street,
Yeah, but I could get.
fill that thing up.
I'm on the corner, so I probably get 6 or 7, maybe 8 cars, including in the garage.
But you gotta notify a lot of people.
But they would just be parking
And
adjacent to your house.
yeah.
I don't know, I think,
So it depends on the property and what's going on.
well, if they wanted to park all up and down the street, I mean, that was part of the concern that we had from the other neighbor, and so I don't know that we're really addressing that.
Mayor, council, what we could do would be to say that all parking has to be off-street, and if the city were to permit any on-street parking, that would have to, the Airbnb would have to get a permit or something from the city for that. And there are cities that do that, where they just say, okay, all parking has to be off-street, and if you say, we'll give you 2 permits for, that's, if you don't have a permit, and you park on street, and we find that you're a guest on Airbnb, you get ticketed.
Yeah, I think that sounds.
Situations like this are outliers of how these things are used. I think having a party house is an outlier of how these things are used. I like what we had before with, the parking with whatever the property requires. I mean, there's nothing to say, if I have a party at my house, I'm not renting anything out, if I had 20 people come over, I don't have to provide parking on off-street for them to park.
But they're there for the night too, not there for maybe a week.
Well,
I mean, I think those are the.
But a lot of short-term rentals are also just for a night. So they're splitting hairs there, I think.
And I think this is another one where, let's see where we are a year from now. Again, we're putting in a limitation on the occupancy. We are putting in a primary residence, so it's not happening 12 months out of the year. It's a condensed period of time. So I think this is one that, let's see what we learn through the process, and let's keep it simple for now. Another example, apart from having a party, there are homes that have 2 kids with cars, parents, and they have extra cars, and it happens all the time. It's not just under this situation, right? So I just don't want to, I don't think this is the point in time that this would need to be addressed.
But it does need to be addressed.
We addressed it.
Yeah.
Mayor, for some consideration.
What is the
He's like, oh, this was not.
what is the conclusion?
What's the conclusion that you got from
Well,
this?
right, the prior conclusion from 2 study sessions back would be that you could park just like any other residence. You could park off-street in your existing driveway. If that was not sufficient and there was on-street parking available, you could park on-street, but you could not expand your driveway or use the front yard for parking.
Here. Perfect.
Good start.
I'm good with that.
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
Okay, you got it.
Would you go back to one item to what everybody said we agreed to that I'm not sure that I...
On parking,
Or, no,
On
the one before...
The contact.
on the local contact, they have to be within 10 miles.
Whoever your contact.
The local contact is. And you have to notify all of the adjacent neighbors of the local contact and the Airbnb licensees' contact information. So if there's a problem, I'm a local neighbor, I know who to call.
That's 360.
Ignoring public right away.
Yes.
And we ignore the public right of way.
We talk about signs again.
I do actually have
Mayor, help me out.
a question kind of regarding that. What about at an apartment? How many would it be every unit that's adjacent to it or a condo? How would that work? If someone has a 2-bedroom apartment and is renting out one of their bedrooms?
You generally are renting an apartment versus owning. Now, I guess we could certainly, I think that's a little bit more problematic. I mean, I don't know about you, Jocelyn, but I think the notifying of it, we could notify adjacent apartments, I suppose.
I think most apartment leases do not allow
Yeah.
this. I mean, if
I just was wondering.
Now, with townhomes, for example, I live in a townhome. If this was in place, I would have to notify both my neighbor to the right, my neighbor to the left, and my neighbors across the street. I don't see a problem with that.
Yeah.
Good. That's good.
Karina.
The one question that I followed up with you was the grandfathering in of the existing license holders. I know in our last discussion, we talked about that you would handle that administratively and work with the individual current license holders. I just want to be clear what our conclusion is there.
The issue that we have on the existing license holders is, we have a number of them in planned, like 5 of the 10 on planned developments. And so right now, the planned development allows that use. So they would be a permitted use under the zoning code. I think what my recommendation would be that the other 5 are in various zoning districts. To me, we want 2 things out of the existing licensees. One, we do want to get them and make sure we have a business license. The one question is, if I'm an existing licensee, it may not be my primary residence. The other items, I think it's reasonable to expect a licensee to meet. The question is, do we allow it, does the council feel it wants to address the issue of primary residence for existing licensees who have a valid business license to do a short-term rental. And what I would recommend is that we make them come in and get the actual planning license, but how would we address primary residents when they apply for that planning license?
Right now, it's 8 months.
Right now, they don't have to get a planning license, all they get is a business license.
What we have already.
Yeah, they would be grandfathered in until 2020. The question is that long enough? Or does the council want to say for those?
I thought we decided that at the last study session.
That's why it says 8 months.
I think you decided grandfathering. There was one question, which was the issue of primary residence, and I think as long as
We did,
I thought it said 8 months.
the council in agreement is 2020.
Things.
Is it 2 different?
No, two different things. The primary residence, 8 months. People that currently have a license that aren't their primary residence, how long do we give them to come into compliance?
I agree, but it says 8 months for the primary, yeah.
Yes.
But Karina, she's asking about the existing.
Right, the ones
Existing
that
ones,
are legitimate right now.
Yeah.
And that's where we said a year, was that to get it?
May I? I believe the council did set the direction to staff that, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but it was 1 year for the transition of the existing business licenses to come into full compliance, including residency. So that means, based on the last conversation, you guys did settle that. I think the question that Karina's asking is, do you still want to, at the end of 1 year, still to require the residency for those existing 10 or 9?
A primary residence for somewhere between 5 and 9 is what we're talking about. That, because those are the existing licensees who have business licenses. We have a total of 9. Some of them are primary residents. I believe it's 5 or not. And so the question is, is there something you want to do about those 5?
So we're gonna allow people to rent
they have to come into compliance in 2020.
okay, by 2020, it has to be a primary residence only.
January 1, 2020 is the date you said.
Right, moving or, yeah.
Yeah, unless we've changed our mind.
I hold the same position that I had last time that we discussed this, that these individuals have not triggered any complaints. They have followed our code as we had it implemented, and by becoming compliant to the point of primary residence can be a significant hardship within a year given the real estate market. So I do feel that for those, there has been no cause for those to be forced into, as I said,
I
hardship
agree, I'm okay
situations.
with the grandfather.
But she's saying in more than a year.
She's saying eliminate it altogether.
I'm agreeing.
Yeah.
Oh, eliminate it, let them continue.
Until there is a
Unless there's
cause
issues.
to revoke it.
Yeah, unless there's an issue of some sort.
So for those 5 that
Yeah,
are.
because I know we had one person come in and speak, and she has it as her investment property. And if there's no issues, she just happened to get under the wire on this.
No, I agree, and that's why I don't necessarily support the primary residence requirement, but, so I.
So, Mayor, I think we are looking at.
Okay, so we had decided to grandfather, or that they had to come to compliance 2020. Karina would rather they not have to come into compliance.
And Jerry?
Peggy, where are you?
They have until 2020 to come in compliance. That's the other, what you just said.
2020 or never.
Grandfather indefinitely.
Give them 2020.
I do too.
Aye.
Kyle.
We're talking for 5.
Okay, but everybody let these guys decide. Go ahead.
I mean, I think if we're gonna do this, we should make everyone follow the same rules, but I also,
Whatever,
come back to me, let me think about it a little more.
I'm 2020.
I'm grandfather.
2020.
Okay.
okay.
All right, anything
I
else?
think we have resolved all of the issues, and I covered that at the beginning, so I think we are done. We'll see you in your office. Unless council insists on a sequel to the study sessions, The city attorney does not have one planned.
So we will see in our packet on Thursday, we will see this as a first read.
Yes, you will.
And remember that a first read is just moving it to a second read public hearing. So if after the first read, there are questions, concerns, things that you want to talk to the city attorney about, I think he asked that we make sure that we, any amendments or anything that we would want to make, that we get those through his office, get them written up so that we can go smoothly through this and then even us back out to the rest of the council.
Ideally, that's the case.
To all of
Yeah,
council.
as long as they're done in time, the council can get that information, get that out to council, so that we're prepared for the meeting. So, okay, thank you, nice job.
Good job, Steve.
Thank you. Any report, city manager?
Just a couple of issues. Steve touched on this earlier here, but your upcoming agenda here for the balance of the year, the two regular meetings, 4th and the 18th, are pretty heavy, and they're dominated by fire issues. So we obviously had the election, and that kind of set the direction here for us to conclude the unification here with South Metro. So we talked with the mayor about some ways how you can structure the kind of the public hearings kind of surrounding a lot of that. So as an example, you can aggregate all these issues and have one public testimony for all issues. You'll have to act on them separately, but there are some ways for us to kind of make that more efficient for both the public as well as the councils. But it's unfortunately, all these actions have to be taken by the end of the year. The other thing is that I know we had a couple of council members attend a meeting here by the owners of the Southview apartment complex. I am going to ask staff who was also there to kind of summarize some of that so I can keep all of council informed. And unfortunately, this is going to take some significant time here on the part of the owner of the apartment complex to kind of sort through this issue and get some answers to these people. They're struggling. And so this is a real difficult problem. And I think our residents here are looking to the city to do whatever we can, and certainly we are. And we are poised here, certainly at the building department level, so when they are ready to start some remodel work, we'll process this immediately. So unfortunately, we've got just a very difficult situation for a lot of people in the Southview apartments.
Has the air quality test come back? It was supposed to come back on Friday, I thought.
They have one of them came back.
Came back negative.
Yeah, no asbestos.
Good.
But they have to do, they're doing a second one.
So we allowed, nobody's gone in the building
Limited
yet.
access for certain
People
things.
have gone in the building. That's what's killing me right now. People have gone in the building.
But not residents.
Right.
There's inspectors in there, and
Right.
they're the people that are doing the air quality testing. Once the air quality, part of what one of the guys explained is that, the smoke has dropped. So smoke is like the air of the smoke, but then there's the particles in that. And so now they're in the basement, the first floor and the second floor, testing that air too. And the state has a lot of regulations that these guys, I think their first run through was with their remediation group, the cleanup folks. And now the state's come in and said, okay, here's now what we want you to do. And so they're doing that. They have no choice. But the one guy said that they were going to be done with those tests today, and it would be 36 hours to get the information back. So hopefully that will also prove out well. But then it still doesn't mean anybody's moving back in, because there's a ton of structural. Fire did a lot of structural damage, and they are probably gonna have to rebuild a substantial part of that, so.
The concerns I have, or at least what I've heard from the public, is just getting in there to get the permit.
They did have them write down today on a piece of paper, what are the things that we can get out of there for you, for the people that live on the 3rd, 5th, and 4th floors.
Right.
Or third,
4th.
3, 4, 5. And so they can go in there and get things like their computer, or their car keys, or their
Sure.
small things like that. So they were writing all that, giving that to
Oxygen
them.
machines, all this
And,
basic stuff.
yeah, wheelchairs.
Car
And
keys.
Love Inc. is helping these guys help navigate their insurance. They're getting the last half of November rent back. They are working with them on those that don't want to come back, getting them their security deposits back. So the management company says that they're trying to expedite those things. So,
Maybe I don't have to do much of it.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay, but I just want to keep all of council informed, because you all of them have asked me about it, so.
Well, Kelly's done she did a good job of her summary on Monday.
Yeah, the staff courthouse, in my opinion, there's a lot to share with council at some point here, but not only just the actions of the police and fire here, but multiple departments have been involved with this here, certainly to date, and as you touched on, Mayor, Love Inc. and other groups, American Red Cross. I mean, it's really an amazing effort that has gone out in our community to try to resolve this.
Is there something we can take away from this for future reference? Hopefully we never have another one, but can we...
3 years ago.
What's that?
That's what we said a few years ago.
Yeah.
We are actually, as staff, we're debriefing this issue at some point in time when it's appropriate.
and I will say, it's once again, these weren't public buildings, these were private buildings.
Sure.
And our first responders were there, they ran in, they risked their lives, they ended up in the hospital over it, they saved lives. We got our Humane Society over there, they pulled out every animal, so their animals are safe, they're keeping their animals, they're not gonna charge them for their animals. The building people that own the building are the ones that are keeping the people out, they're the ones that haven't figured out how to get them back in there, to get someone in there to get their stuff out. We aren't in charge of any of that. We turned the building over to them when we felt it was safe enough for them to be able to get in there and do what they needed to do. Love Inc. is essentially what they're doing is they're managing the faith-based network of people who keep wanting to help, bringing in food and helping house people. I think the one thing, council, that perhaps at some point we can have a conversation about is when these things happen, the biggest problem is being able to get these people into some sort of safe housing that is temporary but appropriate. Some of them are staying at the Hampton Inn, which is nice, but there's not a little buffet thing in the room to make their meals, so they have to eat out. The per diem that their insurance company gives them covers breakfast, right? So there's these kind of things, which that's nothing we can't change what the insurance company does or what the hotel does or that, but kind of keeping an idea on maybe where there's opportunity for, and you don't know when these come up. These are emergencies. These are.
How many total people?
I think there's 135 or so in the building.
But to Pat's point of what did we learn, I think the way to look at that as well, or what are the things we did right and how do we make sure and that they are systemic and this is our standard protocol. And likely a lot of them are, but maybe there were some that were not, but worked well for us. So how do we turn some of those, good things that we did into a standard so we...
Exactly. Yeah, and I think too, the fact that January 1st, we have a new fire department that will be working within our city here, South Metro, so part of the unification. So that's been another layer of the conversation is how do we communicate here as soon as an incident occurs, certainly myself being contacted, but then the rest of the internal communication is something we got to talk through. So yeah, we have a lot to learn here and just make sure that we are following the best protocol possible.
You put the message out pretty quick.
Yeah, and I've had the privilege to have our fire chief, our police chief text me immediately when things happen. And so South Metro knows this, but my expectation is to get the same thing that happens after January 1st. So we're just kind of talking through, making sure that we know who's doing what.
That's a great example of what worked well and how do we standardize that.
That's right. That's it.
Mayor, Council, one thing, to follow up on what Mark mentioned, you'll see on your agenda for the fire transaction a number of special warranty deeds and a number of bill of sales. These are standard documents in the commercial transactions world. I would tell you some of the English syntax in these documents is they're drafted by lawyers and real estate brokers. Not that we don't use good English, but we don't. We can't change the deed, the form of the deeds, and the form of the bill of sales. That invokes significant issues both with South Metro and with us. If you have issues with the council communication, I understand that, but I would just ask that council on the actual warranty deeds and on the bills of sale, then I will grant the English is not what I might draft, but these are standard documents in the Colorado real estate industry that we really need to use.
Given the,
And adapted by our partners also, so.
so given the significance of these documents and the sheer quantity, are we able to get anything sooner? So
They'll all be first read, so you'll get everything
start.
Thursday. They're all gonna be second read on the 18th.
So we'll see them all for the first read, so we can start
You will
there.
see all the deeds will all be first reads on the 4th. The bills of sale will be general business, but we have everything. We are working to the clerk as fast as we can. So the clerk, I expect, will have the packet. It's just going to be a very, very, very large packet, just because of the sheer volume of attachments.
Yeah, and I might add that just the sheer size, you know, Thursdays are just a deadline to council, but we're doing our best to make sure that happens. But if it gets pushed to, say, Friday morning, I'll certainly let you know. But we're doing our best to get this rather large packet out by Thursday.
And quite honestly, we had started this a week before Thanksgiving just because we knew of the volume. So literally, honestly, I've only been doing fire things for the last 2 weeks, and that's fine.
No, we had to wait to see what the election was so that you weren't preparing two sets of documents.
Yeah, and we had to wait.
A lot of
till
this,
the-
quite honestly, council, a lot of this really is,
exactly what
it's what
Steve
we've
said.
got to do.
Yeah.
It's the Ts are being crossed, the Is are being dotted, and it's checked by 5 lawyers, and
There are a true number of lawyers involved.
it's not so much policy anymore as approvals. All right, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
A question for you.